Use this microphone. Barry, we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll use this microphone for the sake of those who are watching this recorded or who might be watching online, joining us online, and I hope that there are many. Because as I've said for the past several weeks, and I know we said back when we were planning to do this in 2020, this is really important. I know those of you who are with us here in person, those of you who work with this every single day, those of you who are joining us online or watching this at a later time, understand how serious this is and how this affects not just an individual who may be personally involved in or personally in crisis, but our communities, and that's what tonight is about. My name is Sam Perkins. I'm one of the pastors here at Westminster Presbyterian, and I'm delighted that we finally have made time to do this after having a 2-year delay. I want to introduce one person who we met last week and who many of us know, and then our featured speaker for tonight. Randy Abbott will be up here again in just a moment to kind of recap last week. In case you've forgotten or in case you were not able to join us. And Randy, this has touched his life in a very, very deep and personal way, and he has thrown himself into work to raise awareness about this crisis, as well as ways that we, again, as community can respond to not just working to eradicate the issue, not just working to eradicate the crisis, but working to come alongside and help those who are in crisis, because that is just as important, and right now, maybe even in some ways more important, coming alongside those who find themselves in crisis, whether directly as people who are taking opioids, or folks who are who have loved ones who are in that crisis mode. So Randy's going to recap and do a little Q&A later. But Elizabeth Brewington, who I'm finding out more and more is very much a child of Greensboro, was raised here in Greensboro and apparently was reared not just by her lovely parents, but also by another of our pastor, Butch Sherrill's daughters, who were her primary child care providers. And as I said just a moment ago, she turned out all right, I guess. So, right. Well, I will tell you that one thing she is doing right is working in this field to, again, just as Randy raise awareness for this. Elizabeth is the Associate Director of Partners in Health and Wholeness, an initiative of the North Carolina Council of Churches. As I said, she's a native of this area and is very well-versed in all the statistics for our state, which are sobering, to say the least. And so she's going to be providing us some ways that we can be about change, that we as a church, we as a faith community, and just people in the community of many different faith practices and no faith, because it touches everyone. It doesn't matter what you observe as far as your faith goes, or where you walk in your life. It finds its way in. I want to make just a couple of comments of things that I've become aware of just this week. Some of which I was aware of kind of in a fringe way, but I had 2 people send me articles this week that are recent articles. One showing pills that are now out there in our schools and our workplaces on the street that look exactly like opioid pills. I would not be able to tell the difference looking at one from the other, but are chock full of fentanyl. Another article was sent to me, and we had some conversation in a meeting earlier this week, showing similar pills that are being distributed that look like sweet tarts. They're rainbow colored. They look like rock candy or hard candy. Who do you think those are going to? It hurts my heart. It's disgusting and it's terrifying to me to know, and I have teenagers that live in my house, and they have friends, and their friends have friends, and we've got children in our church, we have children in our community, we have children across this country and certainly around the world who are being exposed to this. People are manufacturing and peddling these things to put in the hands of young people. And that has to stop. And the responsibility is not on somebody else. The responsibility is on us. We need to raise our voices. We need to do things. And it may be that we need to raise our voices so that they're loud enough to get to the ears of the people who can go into our neighborhoods and into our communities to make lasting change. But I am so uneducated on this, and so I'm going to hand the mic over to Randy and to Elizabeth to give us more information and some practical things to do, hopefully, to be a part of that change. So Randy, I'm going to hand it to you.
All right, so I'm going to take about 10 minutes and recap what we did, what we talked about last week for those of you that were here, or those of you that are watching online or will watch this later. So last week we had 4 speakers, including myself, Jim Albright, who is the head of emergency services in Guilford County, Melissa Floyd Pickard, who is a social worker and a professor at UNCG, and then Mike Tull, who is the head of GC Stop, which is Guilford County's solution to the opioid problem. I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of those presenters spoke about, and then we'll turn it over to Elizabeth. Beforehand, I did want to do, just let everybody know that again this week, and we'll talk about Narcan during the presentation today, but I do have some Narcan available for anyone that would like to have Narcan to keep in their purse with them. We don't recommend that you keep it in the car because of the extreme temperatures, but carry it with you. It's I've got a little Narcan bag that I carry with me. I've got it in my briefcase, and it just stays with me everywhere I go, so I pretty much keep Narcan with me. And then Sam just mentioned the fake pills that are out on the street. Another place that our kids are getting opiates is from the home medicine cabinet, or from a friend's medicine cabinet, or a friend's grandparents' medicine cabinet. There was a study done, and I don't remember the exact date or study, I just remember the numbers because they're so shocking. And of those that were surveyed that had a substance use disorder, they were surveyed and they were asked when they started first experimenting with drugs or alcohol. 90% started before the age of 18. That's our high schoolers. 60%, actually it was more than 60%, but 60% started as young as middle school. So of those that started with opiates, the majority of them came from a home medicine cabinet. So this is a medication disposal kit. There is a clear Rubbermaid tote as you exit the church in one of the chairs. I ask you, if you would, just, invite you to take a couple of these kits. I can get plenty, so take as many as you feel that you would like to have, hand them out to neighbors. But this will hold up to 90 pills. You open it up, you put the 90 pills in, you add water, all the instructions are here. You leave it open for a second because it's going to bubble and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And then you seal it up and you throw it in the trash. It completely deactivates the medication so that it is not usable for anything anymore. You'll hear people say you can dispose of them in coffee grounds or use cat litter is another one. And you can, but I will tell you that someone that has a severe enough substance use disorder that's looking for drugs will go through those things and get them and try to figure out a way to use them. So take a disposal kit. And if you want naloxone, let me know. I've got it right up here. So, all right, Barry, what am I doing wrong? It's not working again. It doesn't like me. It did this to me last time. When I was just testing it, it did this. Yeah, I saw that. That's why I stopped. We're having technology issues in the church. Ready to go? All right. So I'm just going to show you a couple of slides from one or two from each presenter that I felt like were really important. So this slide, this was, and we can get these to anybody that would like to see them in detail, because I know you can't really read that print, but the important part of this is that we are 5% of the world's population. The U.S. is only 5% of the world's population, yet we take 80% of the world's opioids in that 5% of the population. Barry, you may have to come advance the slides, man. It is not working for me. All right. So this is Guilford County. And this is where, this is a slide that Jim put together that shows, of the last year, overdose responses in Guilford County. So every one of these triangles is where there was an opioid response, where EMT was called. Now, if you look at that, this is High Point down here. Here's Jamestown. Here's the airport, Bryan Park. There's not a neighborhood in Greensboro that's not touched. So it touches everyone. All right, we're going to try it again. Hey, we make it however we can. Then Melissa talked about trauma and adverse childhood experiences. People want to know a lot of times is, where do kids start? How do they start? Why do they start experimenting with drugs? This was the case for my daughter. My daughter started experimenting in high school, and it became a way for her to self-medicate through depression and anxiety and some issues that we weren't even ever really aware of. We knew there were some things going on. She was pretty severely bullied up to a point until she really started self-medicating, but she also got the courage about her sophomore year in high school to say, you know what, no, I don't need to deal with that anymore. She was in a different school situation. And that is an adverse childhood experience, bullying. Something as simple for some kids, as simple as a pet dying, can be so traumatic that it stays with them. Now, I'm not going to say they're going to start experimenting with drugs over that, but it's that, and it's all of the things that stack up with that. You know what, I'm not even going to try this time. And then Mike talked with us about GC Stop and what GC Stop is really their mission is. So GC Stop serves the community's most vulnerable populations, people who have overdosed and others who are at high risk for opioid use related mortality. So what that means is, going back to those red triangles, after one of those emergency visits, one of those calls, GC Stop gets pretty much an immediate notification that has occurred. And they know where that is, and they will, pretty much within 24 hours, they will make contact with that person and offer services and offer help. People who, and Elizabeth is probably going to talk about this, but people who use harm reduction services are way more likely to seek treatment at some point. Okay? A lot of people will say harm reduction enables. The only thing harm reduction enables is to be there to help people. It's good for the community. I'm not going to say anything else about harm reduction.
You're stealing my slides.
I don't want to steal her slides. So, so I'm going to stop right there and let her talk about harm reduction. But I think that's the last one that I had. Yep, the next ones are hers. She's got a whole presentation. I think Barry said he would. Do you need to come pull hers up? Okay. Just as you work this way, I'll give a couple of more things. So for those of you that maybe weren't here or that don't know, we lost our daughter to an overdose in 2015, January the 31st of 2015. And my wife and I differ a little bit on our memory of exactly what time the sheriffs showed up at our door, but it was around 2:15 in the afternoon. We got a knock on the door, and they were there to let us know our daughter had overdosed from a suspected heroin overdose, or had died from a suspected heroin overdose. The year she died, we were talking about 120 people a day, roughly, in the United States dying from overdose. This past year, it was 294 a day. So I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep working and advocating and trying to do what I can to help people, because no parent, no family should have to go through that grief of losing a child. So, Elizabeth, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for having me. I love any excuse to come back to Greensboro. Like Randy and Sam said, I am with the North Carolina Council of Churches, and the North Carolina Council of Churches has actually been around for 87 years, working to end different issues across the state of North Carolina, predominantly working to end racial injustice in the state of North Carolina. I work for the Partners in Health and Wholeness program that came about 11 years ago to work with faith communities on issues of health and faith and how they intersect. I was actually hired 4.5 years ago to specifically work on the opioid crisis. We were hearing from congregations saying, we keep losing people, substance use is a huge issue, what do we do? And so our program was born, and we work with faith communities to come up with ways that they can get involved. So, next slide. So what is harm reduction? Now, side note, I am a Sunday school teacher, so I am going to ask you to get a little bit involved in this presentation. So, how many of you drove here today? Did you wear your seatbelt? Awesome. All right, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand for this one, but did you obey the speed limit? But then the balance, yeah. Do you take your car to get inspected? Do you take it to get serviced? We do all these things to make sure our cars are safe, because car accidents are one of the leading causes of death in the United States, and we do whatever we can to reduce the risk of that risky behavior. My dad is a cyclist. We know that head accidents, if you don't wear a helmet, are very dangerous. And so in order to reduce his risk, he wears a helmet. He makes sure that he signals, do all the different things. We're at the end of summer. We know skin cancer is a huge issue, so what do? We wear sunscreen. Harm reduction at its core is whatever we can do to reduce the risk of high-risk behaviors. Next slide. So when we switch and talk about drug use and substance use, harm reduction still stays the same. It is reducing harms associated with high-risk behaviors to improve a person's quality of life. The philosophy of harm reduction looks different for each individual. It values incremental gains. You'll often hear people who work in the harm reduction world say, any positive change, any positive step. It centers dignity and compassion and hope, and it involves many programs, policies, and practices. Harm reduction has been around for 40 years. It originally came out of the HIV epidemic. We have tons of research to back up how these programs work. Next slide. So like I said, harm reduction has been around for 40 years. It's not anything goes. You can't just do something and say it's harm reduction. This is backed up in science. Because it's grounded in that dignity, compassion, and hope, it's all about trust. The reason people are 5 times more likely to enter treatment because of harm reduction program is because of that trust. They know that they're going to be met in a non-judgmental space, and they can ask all the hard questions. Like Randy said, people assume harm reduction is enabling. I have a colleague who likes to say, yes, I'm a proud enabler. I enable people to live disease-free, healthy lives and make good choices. That's all harm reduction is, educating people on better choices. I will say harm reduction is not a hook to get people into treatment. Because it's grounding in individual dignity, compassion, and hope, the individual has to tell them what they're ready for. Everybody's journey is different. People might end up in treatment, and that is wonderful, and we celebrate that. It might be a medication-assisted recovery route. It could be an abstinence base. Because we're all different, we all have different journeys, and we can't dictate what that journey is going to be for somebody. That being said, harm reduction is not anti-abstinence. Harm reduction looks at a spectrum of policies and programs, and it embraces whatever a person wants to do. So if that is abstinence for them, that is amazing, and we celebrate that. If that's medication-assisted treatment, that is amazing, and we celebrate that. We want to make sure that the person is doing what they can to improve their own quality of life. Next slide. All right. So how does harm reduction connect to faith? Like I said, I'm a Sunday school teacher, so I'm going to tell you a story. You all know the story of Lazarus. Lazarus is a friend of Jesus. He dies, and Lazarus' sisters call Jesus and say, please come, our brother has died. We are so sad. So Jesus comes, but here's the key thing. Jesus waits 4 days. And so Lazarus is really dead. His soul has left his body. He is dead as a doornail. So what's the first thing Jesus does when he comes? He is present and grieves with Lazarus' sisters. He holds a moment of space. They feel everything. They grieve together. And then Jesus goes, okay, let's go. Everybody follows him out to the tomb. A crowd is gathering because, Jesus is about to do something. We don't know what, but he's going to do something. They roll away the tomb, and they say, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus comes forth. Again, he's been dead for 4 days. Doesn't smell great. He's still wrapped in the womb closed. And Jesus tells the crowd around him, go unbind him. Now, I relate this story to harm reduction because there's a role for everyone to play in this story. Jesus does the healing, but we all have jobs to do. Some of us are going to be present with the families and grieving. Some of us have to roll that big stone away. Other of us are going to get up close and unbind those cloths. It's going to be smelly, it's going to be dirty, it's going to be hard. But we all have a role to play, and they're not more important than the other. We all have to be agents in helping that miracle come forth and be free. But Jesus is going to do the actual healing. That's not our job. We're removing barriers and making sure we can be present with people. The other way I relate harm reduction to my faith is the Gospels. Honestly, Jesus goes out and meets people where they are. He goes and does the healing. He doesn't say, come to me, jump through some hoops, maybe in 7 days I'll come and help you out. No, he's like, all right, you need healing? Step right up, I'll come to you. Harm reduction is all about meeting people where they are and making sure that they can access whatever they need and trying to break down barriers for people. Next one. I have a resource. It's called The Spirit of Harm Reduction, and this has a bunch of other Bible verses and quotes that people can use and how they relate to harm reduction in their own faith. I chose those other two because that's what personally speaks to me, but these verses might speak to you. It's available online, and I have a link to it at the end of the slideshow that I can also send Randy as well if you're interested. So transitioning to thinking about harm reduction as a ministry, ways that your congregation can get involved or you specifically can get involved. My quote got a little wonky, so apologies, but it's a quote from St. Augustine, and it says, what does love look like? It has the hands to help others. It has the feet to hasten to the poor and needy. It has the eyes to see misery and want. That is what love looks like. So when thinking about what you can do, I'm going to call back to Lazarus. Maybe what you're called to do as a church is to hold space for somebody. Let me click to the next one. I love this quote by Heather Plett that says, "Holding space for another person means that we are willing to walk alongside another person in whatever journey they're on, without judging them, without making them feel inadequate, trying to fix them, or trying to impact the outcome. When we hold space for other people, we open our hearts and offer unconditional support, and we let go judgment and control." So maybe that's where you're called in this crisis, is to be a non-judgmental space and to offer support to families in need, to persons struggling, to be that non-judgmental space. Another way to get involved is stigma-reducing language. I have a handout up here of these words, if you would like one. But I'd also like to frame this in a Bible story, so again, apologies, it's the Sunday school teacher in me. It was actually my Sunday school lesson today, so even more apologies. So, in the beginning, God created the world, and he said it was good. So when we first meet somebody, we're creating a world with them, and the words we choose will determine whether or not that world is good or bad. So if we first meet somebody with stigma, that is going to color the entire interaction with them. But if we center them as a person first, we can let the labels fall away and have a good relationship. I have a colleague, her name is Minister Michelle Mathis. She says she's never met an addict. She's met a Danielle, a Jenna, a Jim, a Ben. If you say the person's name, you center them and you see their whole story. You don't have to put the label first. So I highly recommend thinking about stigma-reducing language and incorporating it into your life. I will say, I know a lot of people who have lived experience and are in recovery, and these words are very meaningful for them. Clean time, addict, things like that. And if you are a person with experience, fully support the words you want to choose. I don't have that experience, and so I'm not going to put that label on you. So that's kind of my 2-cent pitch for stigma-reducing language. Next slide. So one thing your church could do is a medication take-back. Randy has those bags, which is amazing, but maybe you want to host an event here at the church. You talk to the Greensboro Police Department, they'll have a DEA-trained agent come out, and you can collect all the unused pills and medication, and the DEA agent will properly dispose of them. I had a friend do this in Hickory, and they got over 100 pounds of unused medication come back. Now, what's great about these medication take-backs is you can bring any medication. It could be your dog's medication, it could be your kid's medication, it could be an opioid, whatever. They will take it and properly dispose of it. Next slide. Maybe you want to advocate. We have the opioid settlement funds that have just come into the county. Maybe you want to use your voice to make sure the county knows the best ways to spend that funds. Randy and I are also on a coalition that is trying to reform our Good Samaritan Law. This is a law that when somebody is in the middle of overdosing, they can call 911 and have immunity. Our current law is very convoluted and it's very hard to understand, and so we're trying to broaden it so more people feel safe to call EMS in the event of an emergency. So if you want to get involved in that work, reach out to me. We'd be happy to get you involved in that. Next one. Maybe you are interested in having a naloxone training or a kit-making party. Randy's got the naloxone up here. It takes about 3 minutes to learn, maybe less. It is very easy to do. And GC Stop and other harm reduction organizations are always looking for people to pack naloxone for them so they can give it out to the community. I actually have a prayer up here for a blessing of the naloxone, so maybe you want to pack all the naloxone and then come up and bless it and send it out into the community. I also encourage people to think outside the box. These little bags that you can see on the screen are from Gaston County and Catawba County. These little small ones are from Catawba. There's a group called the Catawba Crafters. They affectionately call themselves the Old Hookers, and they are a crochet group. They decided how they would help their local harm reduction organization is they would crochet these bags, and up at the top is some reflective yarn, and they put naloxone in it. And so the local harm reduction organization gives it out so people can find their naloxone by starlight, flashlight, street light, whatever they are, so they always know. This pattern is also a washcloth, so now somebody can have something homemade and use it as a washcloth if they're unhoused. Now, the Gaston group decided to one-up the Catawba group and make the bags double the size, and so an entire syringe exchange supply kit can go in them. So that's another way that your community could get involved. Maybe you have a knitting group and would like to learn how to get more involved with this project. It's called Hooking for Hope. It will also tell you where you can get the reflective yarn. I will say that yarn, I think, makes this just above and beyond special because it makes it so much more accessible for people to find this life-saving drug. I don't think I have this slide on here, but naloxone is associated with a 50% drop in overdose fatalities. And when an area is flooded with naloxone, overdose fatalities drop. So I'm gonna poll the audience. Would y'all like to learn how to reverse an overdose with naloxone? Would that be something of interest? Okay. Can I steal your kit? Yep. All right. Cool. So naloxone or Narcan is kind of like Kleenex and tissue. One's a brand name that everybody calls and one's a generic. There are 3 kinds. There is an intermuscular, which is a needle. There is a nasal spray, and then there is an auto-injector. Last time I learned about the auto-injector, it was like $3,000. It's kind of ridiculous. So I don't see a lot of it. The most common ones are the nasal spray and the intermuscular. The auto-injector will talk you through the process. I'm here to demonstrate. So this is the nasal spray. First thing you want to do is see if the person is responsive. So everybody make a fist, take your knuckles, and rub them up and down your sternum. It's kind of uncomfortable, right? Now, it's more uncomfortable if you're not doing it to yourself. And so if the person is not responsive to that, it usually means they are possibly doing an overdose. Tyler last week brought up the point that naloxone is only used for overdose reversals. If somebody is having a heart attack or any other mental or other health condition, this will not affect them. All this is going to do is knock the opiate receptor off your, knock the opiate off the opiate receptor. That's the words I was trying to use. So, once you've done the sternum rub, try yelling their name. Most likely the person is unresponsive. So, you want to peel back this paper and you take out the nasal spray. It's just kind of like an Afrin. You're going to stick it in the person's nose and push the plunger. If they are not coming to in about 1 minute to 2 minutes, give them a second dose. Right now, fentanyl is in everything in North Carolina, and fentanyl is 100 times stronger than heroin, and so repeated doses might be needed. While somebody, if you've given the first dose and they haven't come to, do some rescue breathing. That will help the, oh, forgot that I had the microphone on, apologies. The oxygen to the brain will help the person come back quicker, and that will be really helpful. One thing that happens when somebody slips into an overdose is oxygen is stopped going to the brain, and so we really want to make sure there's some rescue breathing. Next slide. Maybe your faith community, your church, wants to host a support group. Maybe it's an NA or an AA. Those are wonderful options. Maybe Celebrate Recovery. Maybe you want to do a group for families who have been directly impacted, or a grief support group. Maybe you want to do a people in active addiction group, or an NA positive change group. There's even a harm reduction works group, which is a 12-step style program that focuses on people who are going through harm reduction and will be in various stages of use and recovery. The other group that I would like to plug is a Medication-Assisted Recovery Anonymous group. That's also known as a MARA group. Sometimes people who are on medication-assisted treatment aren't always allowed in 12-step or NA spaces because the medicine is sometimes viewed as not a total abstinence. And so a MARA group would be a wonderful other addition to possibly a support group. Thanks. Maybe you're called to host a transportation ministry. Transportation is a huge barrier to people getting access to treatment or going to get their medication. And so if you have a church van or a bus that's not used, maybe starting a transportation ministry so people can be able to access those services. Next slide. Maybe you want to have peer-led or different group opportunities like art and music and yoga and game night, a way that everybody can come together and bond, and you don't necessarily know what's going on in everybody's life, but you can create community. Dr. Melissa Pickard last week mentioned a TED Talk called Everything You Know About Addiction is Wrong. And the thesis of that TED Talk that she said was the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. We isolate people who are struggling with substance use, whether that's through stigma or barriers or criminalization. And so any way that we can foster connection is a wonderful way to bring people in and to fight substance use disorder. Next one. Maybe you want to do a supply drive. GC Stop and Urban Survivors Union are your two harm reduction organizations right here in Guilford County. Both are amazing. They are always needing stuff. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, here in Greensboro. Yeah. Both GC Stop and Urban Survivors Union are wonderful, and both can use support. And so I think a supply drive is a wonderful way to do that. You could do that by doing like a wound care supply drive. I think Tyler mentioned last week, harm reduction organizations are always needing bandages and wraps and things like that because people get wounds and come to them for care. Or you could do supplies for their syringe exchange. Or you could host a kit making party and have GC Stop or Urban Survivors Union come to you. This is a group that is in the midst of packing some intermuscular naloxone. So as you can see, they have to put 2 syringes in there, the 2 little vials of naloxone, which is very hard to see in this picture, I will say. And then they put this in that lovely long package with a number. So if somebody uses it, they can call and report it. So we can track how many overdoses have been reversed. So maybe that would be a great event that everybody could come together and do. Again, you could bless the naloxone, send it out into the community, or just have a good time. Now I will say, I stole this from GC Stop, this picture, so all credit goes to them. But they have a blessing box at College Park Baptist Church, which they stock with syringe exchange supplies, but also tampons and other feminine hygiene products. So maybe your church wants to host a blessing box of harm reduction supplies and work with GC Stop or Urban Survivors Union so people have access. Or maybe you want to partner with a syringe exchange. We have a couple churches in the state of North Carolina that host syringe exchanges in their buildings. College Park Baptist is one of them. Green Street UMC in Winston-Salem is another, and then Westminster Presbyterian in Hickory host another. Like Randy said, he stole all my stats at the beginning, but syringe exchanges promote the building of trusting relationships with people who use drugs. They also reduce the likelihood of HIV infection and Hep C. The programs are cost-effective, and people who participate in syringe exchange programs are 5 times as likely to enter into an abstinence-based treatment. So they're really wonderful. Plug, I am part of the Faith and Harm Reduction movement, and I have a couple of their prayers up here. If you want to get involved, they are hosting different webinars, but also have amazing resources like the Spirit of Harm Reduction that I mentioned, and other prayers and resources for faith communities to use and get involved. Again, this is the Spirit of Harm Reduction Toolkit. It's a bunch of different spiritual resources and also includes sermons, stories, poetry, and more, and gives faith communities concrete steps of how to support harm reduction and program and policies. Some of them I already went over. And then a plug for myself, I wrote a Sunday school guide for an adult Sunday school. I found that I need to clarify that because I'm a kid's Sunday school teacher. Everybody assumes it's for kids, but it's for adults. to go through what are opioids, what is harm reduction, how is harm reduction connected to our faith, and there's a bunch of different prayers and resources if you are interested in that. There are some other resources that I just wanted to share in case anybody wanted the links and were curious. And then the next one. Oh, then we're done. So I will take questions. This is definitely a kind of skimmed version of a lot of different ways people can get involved, and I'm happy to answer any questions and go deeper if you have questions about other things.
So if you have questions, do you hear? Now's the time. Please.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious if you could talk about, my suspicion is that in addition to the benefits that individuals may get from some of these church activities, that churches themselves benefit as they move into this movement. I wonder if you could talk about some of what you've seen around that.
Yeah, so I think Northminster is one of my favorite examples because it's most recent. They started hosting Olive Branch Ministry, which is a faith-based harm reduction organization, on their campus starting in 2019. So Olive Branch hosts a holistic harm reduction center that is on the property in a trailer. So Olive Branch hosts art therapy and all the things I had on that slide, and everybody in the church is available to come to it. But also, if somebody in the church knows somebody who's struggling, Olive Branch has resources and will do linkage to care for anybody who needs it. And so it's very much a co-creation between the church and this faith-based harm reduction organization. The church is very much grounded in justice issues, and so it's kind of just an extension of their mission to go out into the community and provide this space as well. Does that answer? Yeah. I will say with Green Street, now that I'm thinking on it, they have one of the longest running NA programs in Winston-Salem. And so when syringe exchange got legalized in North Carolina in 2016, they thought it was just kind of an expansion of that ministry they had already been doing. And so people from the church will go out and do needle litter pickups or volunteer at the syringe exchange, and it kind of just grows that ministry as well. Yes.
This is subject near and dear to my heart, and thank you. I have a son who has struggled for 14 years, and it's not just his addiction, which has involved crack cocaine and street drugs. It's also severe mental illness. So thank you.
Yeah.
Just really, it's the transparency I think is important. That I try not to hide that. He still struggles. He actually is in Ohio and has been charged with it. In Ohio, they call it an OVI, operating vehicle under the influence. He resides at a farm for his mental health issues, and the farm director begged the police not to arrest him. He's still not arrested. He has faced 3 nights at a DUI class at a hotel, and he has lived on this farm for over 3 years.
Yeah.
He's not been able to be off the farm. So it's all, anyway, that's just a little bit of personal background. And I am a grateful member of Al-Anon, families and friends of those who struggle with addiction and alcohol. So thank you. That's why I knew about her.
Yeah.
Is there access to fentanyl test strips?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, like, can you talk about fentanyl test strips?
Yeah.
I know the fentanyl
Of course.
is the scariest.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many scary levels.
Yeah, so I think almost all harm reduction organizations hand out fentanyl test strips, and fentanyl test strips, similar to a COVID test or a pregnancy test, you can test your drugs to see if fentanyl is present. I will say, with the state of North Carolina and the way it is with the drug supply, everything has fentanyl in it at this point. Urban Survivors Union and the North Carolina Chapel Hill School of Injury and Violence Prevention Branch have something called an FTIR machine. And that is a fancy mass spectrometer. I'm not a chemistry person, so excuse me. But it allows people to test their drugs on site and within 10 to 15 minutes know what the chemical composition is. So in addition to fentanyl, they'll find out if there's concrete or sugar water or whatever else is in their supply, and have real-time feedback about whether or not they want to. I do know from Urban Survivors Union, a lot of people throw out their substances once they know what's in it because it is very scary what is in the drug supply. But fentanyl test strips are a lot cheaper than a mass spectrometer, and so they're handed out at a lot of harm reduction organizations. I also want to say thank you so much for sharing about your son. I'm a data nerd, and so what I've found really interesting in this work and heartbreaking is that 2/3 of people who have a substance use disorder also have a co-occurring mental health challenge. And we try to separate them, and it's not something you can separate. My own personal platform, so I'm just going to step aside. It's very strange how we've kind of segmented our bodies when trying to treat them. Like your head, you got to go here. Your dentist, you got to go here. Your arm, you got to go here. And I work for a program called Health and Wholeness. It's all interconnected. And we got to stop thinking that we aren't connected. Anyway, my little side note, platform shift, but I hope that answered your question about test strips. Yes.
You spoke to knowing if someone has had an overdose and it will not hurt them if you give them the fentanyl. How do you know if someone's had an overdose or if it's another kind of issue going on?
So if somebody has had an overdose, they're usually unconscious and unresponsive. You can sometimes look at their lips and under their nail buds. If they're kind of bluish green or turning gray, that means oxygen is not happening, blood flow to the oxygen is not going to their brain. So those are kind of the two signs. Also, you can take the chest rub and see if they will wake up. I've also been told a mustache rub, if you take your knuckles right under your lip, that is really painful, and that usually will wake somebody up. Just press down. I usually tell people, assume they're having an overdose, because naloxone won't hurt you, because its only job is to restore breathing. I actually have a friend who calls it the Lazarus medication because its only job is to restore life and to restore breath. It has no other purpose. So.
I'll add to that two things. One, naloxone only works with an opiate overdose. So
Yes.
if they're overdosing from methamphetamine or cocaine, it will not work for that, unfortunately. Which brings me to the second thing I wanted to add in. This first thing, or the second thing you should do after that first dose of naloxone is dial 911. Hands down, the most important thing that you can do is to call for help. Elizabeth mentioned the Good Samaritan Law, which is something that we're working on to make sure that people who are using together, one overdoses, the other does not, that other person is comfortable calling 911. That's a whole other hour presentation, but that's equally as important as giving Narcan.
It will not hurt. I will say, I have a friend who, when they do naloxone trainings, they say whatever is closest, your phone or the Narcan. Whatever's closest, either call 911 first and then administer Narcan, or if your Narcan's closer, do Narcan, then call 911. With the drug supply as the way it is, if somebody is using cocaine or methamphetamines, there's a high likelihood that there's fentanyl, which is an opioid in it, and that they could slip into an overdose. and so to give them the naloxone. Naloxone is shown to be 90% effective 30 years after the expiration date, so even if you have expired naloxone, use it. It tends to last for 30 to 90 minutes, and so it is possible for somebody to slip back into an overdose after you've given the naloxone, which is why it's important to call emergency services, so they can have more on hand just in case. Yes?
What about, I'm in recovery and in my career, and I'm a nurse. And prior to working here, I worked primarily in substance abuse and mental health. So I've been the head nurse of methadone clinics. I've worked at Fellowship Hall.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I encountered a lot at the methadone clinic, we would occasionally have to give Narcan, is what happens immediately after administering Narcan. And I think that unless you've heard about it or seen it, it may be
Yes.
quite shocking, but the individual who is Narcaned experiences what they would probably describe the worst pain in their entire life. I mean, on almost a primal level, because their body is stripped of all opiates immediately. And so that call to 911 is especially important because you want to then protect them from harm, because
Yeah.
they're very vulnerable. And but it can be quite shocking to see someone after they've received Narcan.
Yeah. It puts someone basically in immediate withdrawal, and the first thing you will hear is as oxygen comes in, it can be very, very scary. And so it is important that if you're there on the scene, that you're a calming presence. If emergency services come, that's going to be flashing lights and large sounds, and it's going to be overwhelming. And so if you can be a steady presence, and again, it is very scary, so it's going to happen. But if you can comfort that person, that is really key. So yes, thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for coming today.
I hate that we have to step out, but thank you so much.
Of course, thank you for coming. Yes.
What's being done in the way of preventive programs, educational programs for, particularly for kids?
So I don't know a ton. I know that there's kind of the DARE, and I think that's it. I do know that there's a harm reduction education program called Safety First that the Drug Policy Alliance put out, but I don't believe that it's currently circulating in any North Carolina schools. So I believe kind of the DARE program is still the big kind of primary prevention program. And
So, and this is me, personal opinion, I will preface this with that. And just from what I have seen with others trying to get into the schools to present what are really good programs. There is still, and it goes back to stigma, there is still an issue in our school systems with kind of the head, excuse me, the head in the sand attitude, in that if we don't talk about a problem, if we don't say we have a problem, then it's not real. Unfortunately, it's very real. The school systems will tell you that the kids are getting education on addiction and substance use disorders, and they are for a chapter in their health class typically. So it's not an ongoing in-depth program. The easiest place, and the place that most people are getting into the schools, is in athletics. And there's a couple of good things there. I've never had a child in athletics in the public school system, but my understanding is if you have a child that's on a team in public schools, that as a parent you have to go to an orientation for that. during that orientation, that is a great time to talk to those parents about opiates, because the athletes are the most likely to be injured and the most likely to have to take opiates. And they're also oftentimes the students that other students look up to. So to kind of start there is a good starting point. But as far as prevention in the schools, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. MAD and SAD are great programs. SAD used to stand for Students Against Drunk Driving. Now they've changed it as Students Against Destructive Decisions, which is really good. A lot of times you are getting the students in those programs, though, that you don't have to worry about as much anyway, if that makes sense. So you're not necessarily reaching those students that are at high risk.
I will say, if you want to start a conversation but aren't sure where to, I think the resilience film on ACEs is a really good starting point.
Exactly.
There can have a big discussion about ACEs and protective factors and things like that, kind of taking mental health and substance use together to talk about it. Yes?
You mentioned before the advocacy piece. And my perception is that in Guilford County, we're a little bit behind some of where other communities are in terms of being able to actually deploy those funds. And I'm curious, as we advocate, if there are particular things that we might want to advocate for that would help our community work forward either more quickly or more effectively based on what else you've seen.
Yeah. So I will say, I don't think Guilford County is particularly behind. The funds came in maybe 2 months ago. And so I think all counties and county commissioners are trying to decide what to do with them. For a little bit of context, the funds that are coming in are from the global opioid settlement. So that's Johnson & Johnson, Cardinal, McKesson, basically everybody but Purdue. That's kind of its own separate pot. And messed up can of worms, if I'm going to mix my metaphors. So what North Carolina has is called a memorandum of agreement. We have $750 million coming into the state. 85% of that is going to the counties, and 85 is going to the counties, and the rest is going to the General Assembly. Each county is given 2 options. Option A, which is a list of 12 high-impact strategies, or option B, which is kind of a collaborative strategic planning process. Option A supports things like improving transportation, access to medication-assisted treatment, syringe exchange programs, improving housing, naloxone distribution, things like that. So my kind of 2 cents would be, go talk to GC Stop. See what they think is really needed in Guilford County. They are the ones on the ground seeing this every day. I think you can't go wrong with those high impact strategies, but GC Stop's gonna know, or Urban Survivors Union, those people are on the ground every day, and they're gonna know what the barriers in Guilford County are, because they're linking people to treatment. They're making sure that naloxone and syringes are out in the community. They're going to be the ones with the real insight to what we should advocate for.
Guilford County just listed last Monday a position in Guilford County that will work through the Public Health Department that will be responsible for pulling all of the coalitions together and what have you within the county. I can tell you that Guilford County chose option B as how they're going to manage their funds and how they're going to use the funds. There is a website which is a dashboard that anyone can access, and you can drill down to each county and see how those funds are being used and help track. You can track those funds. I'll have to get that link. I do not remember what that website is off the top of my head. but I can
Oh,
I
yeah,
can
it's
certainly
like
get it.
opioid settlement
Yeah,
dashboard.
it's something.
Yeah.
Yep.
It will also, you'll be able to see how the money is spent.
Yep.
Which will be very useful. They're trying very hard not to make this like the tobacco settlement, and so trying to have this be as clear and accountable as possible. Hi, friend. Yes. This is my boss, Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole.
No pressure.
Interim co-director for Partners in Health and Wholeness. And I think one of the things I wanted to add was, I'm going to say, be the kind of church where parents can ask questions.
Yep.
And be the kind of church where parents, you want to talk about supporting middle schoolers or high schoolers before they experience trauma or experiment. Be the kind of church where parents can come and ask a question and be like, I don't know what's happening in high school, so can y'all tell me, and what should I look out for, right? Be the kind of place where a parent can come and find out those things, or be the kind of place where you can support families who have somebody who has a substance use disorder. Like, be the kind of place where, even though in a place where we talk about God and we talk about health and wholeness and whole people, some things shouldn't just stay outside of the church because, oh, we shouldn't talk about those things here. Be the kind of place where families and people can come and talk about mental health, and they can talk about stigma, and they can talk about living with HIV, and they can talk about poverty, and they can talk about structural inequities that go into shaping a system that ends up funneling people into making destructive choices for themselves and their families. So I just wanted to say that because somebody was saying, you know, like, what does that look like in kind of, what I took from your question was, what does that look like in a faith community? So be that kind of place, be that kind of church, be those kinds of people. When you look at a person, then we see whole people created in the image of God.
I got one on, so that reminded me of two things. One way to start that conversation as a whole congregation is to host what we call a naming ceremony. I'm an Episcopalian, so I'm very used to prayers of the people. And I actually have a copy of a naming ceremony if you're interested, or you can use it. Basically, it's an opportunity for people to call forth the names we've lost to overdose and the war on drugs. And that's a way for people to know that they're not alone. Because like Randy said, this impacts all of us. The current stats for North Carolina are 9 people a day dying due to an unintentional medication or drug overdose. That is just our community, our friends, our neighbors, our family members. And so hosting a service like that, a naming ceremony, or having a worship service around International Overdose Awareness Day, those are ways that you can start the conversation and facilitate and break some of that stigma within your faith community. My second plug is, if you join Partners in Health and Wholeness, we have something called the Collaborative, where churches can join every year and say that they are going to work on health and faith together as an issue, and you can apply for a $1,000 mini grant. We've had churches use that money to buy naloxone and do a naloxone training, or host a health fair at their church, or do different training programs. So if that's something you're interested in, we offer those resources to help churches do that work. So, my 2 plugs. Yes. So we do different trainings. I have a colleague whose focus area is mental health, and so she has a training on how to become a trauma-informed church. And that looks at ACEs and different ways that faith communities can be more thoughtful when it comes to trauma. We do regular webinars around HIV, overdose, health and wholeness, mental health, kind of anything that talks about health and wholeness, basically. We just hosted a conference 2 weeks ago here in Greensboro called the Faith Health Summit, where we brought public health officials and faith leaders and anyone who is interested to do trainings around kind of the topics of the day. And then we have these grant opportunities that we give to churches. We have a individual church mini grant, which is up to $1,000, or a community mini grant where 3 to 5 churches can come together to work on a project, or we have what's called the Bipoc Mental Health Grant, which is money for predominantly churches of color to talk about mental health. So we have some financial resources, but we also have educational resources as well. Yes?
What is ACEs?
Adverse childhood experiences. So there was a doctor. This is again where I'm a sociology and religious studies major, so not my forte. There was a doctor several years ago who came up with a list of, I think it was 10 at the time, I think it's expanded, things that increase a child's likelihood for trauma, and linked that kind of high risk for trauma for things like chronic illness, diabetes, but also mental health concerns and substance use. The higher the score for an adverse childhood experience, the more likely somebody was to develop it later on. I think Professor Pickard had a graphic last week that showed a cup, and the bottom was pink, which is basically your genetic material that kind of predisposes you to certain things. But then when you also add kind of your experiences and potential trauma, that kind of increases your likelihood for different health issues. And like she was saying last week, trauma looks different for everybody. So one person, it might be somebody of divorce is very traumatic, or a big move, or things like that. That might be traumatic to some person and not for another. Living through a hurricane, things like that could also bring on trauma. You just never know what could affect somebody.
There was if you're familiar with Nova on PBS, there was a Nova episode, probably 3-4 years ago now, on addiction, that is really, really good. And it goes into all of the effects of the brain, but it also talks about ACEs, and it does a good job of explaining that.
And then there's the documentary called Resilience that is all about adverse childhood experiences. Yeah.
That resilience film, how is that?
I think it's free online, but if not, there was a professor at Duke, who I'll have to look up his name, who tries to make it available to anybody and everybody, and will go and facilitate conversations. And so I'll try to look up his name and email it to Randy. But it should be available for free online, and if not, I know they try to make sure it's widely available. The North Carolina Child Coalition is really focused on getting it out there too.
That might be something our congregation could offer.
Yeah.
Widely.
I think there's information on the CDC website about ACEs,
Mm-hmm.
and it has the questionnaire.
Yeah.
Because it's not just for children, it's also for any adult to think back to their childhood.
Yep.
And it
Yeah.
is linked with how much disease and other health issues you might have later in your life. There's a connection.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Thrown a lot at you, so completely understand if there's no more questions, but wanted to open it up just in case.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of questions we have that we don't realize we have, or we haven't found the words for just yet, and certainly many other questions and situations we will likely encounter as we move through our lives. Randy, was there anything else you wanted to say?
Just let you wrap things up and maybe talk about how all of this relates to Westminster.
Yeah. I want to thank Randy. I want to thank Elizabeth for everything they've done to help just make this happen and bring us a lot of information that we need to know whether we want to or not. And I say whether we want to or not because I feel like every statistic I hear and everything that's new that doesn't move toward prevention and restoration, and just exacerbates things in my mind. It scares me more, if I'm being really, really honest. And I think for a lot of people, as we see these numbers go up, and as we see deceptive practices out there trying to put these drugs and these dangerous substances out there, it can lead to hopelessness. I mean, we're not beyond the emotion of despair when this stuff just floods our social media streams and our newsreels and things like that. What I think provides our hope is the fact that we are doing things like this. We are hearing about this, and we're hearing about this here, and it's important that we hear about this here. As Elizabeth said, or as your boss said, that must have been fun to stare at her while you presented. If we can't talk about hard things here, then where can we talk about hard things, right? I mean, if this is supposed to be a community of love, if we're supposed to be about embrace, if we're supposed to be about caring about every part of this body so that the body works as the body's intended to work, then we need to be well informed, and we need to have hard conversations, and we need to get down in the dirt, and we need to be willing to step out, and we need to be willing to say, I don't know enough, or I don't know anything, and I need to learn. One thing that Cindy said, Cindy Higgins this morning, was one of our pastors here at Westminster. In her sermon this morning, she said part of the DNA of Westminster is to care well and live well. And I think that nails it. Because if we claim that is part of our identity, then we have to move our feet, and we have to raise our voices, and we have to extend our arms, and we have to be about the work that is going to move us closer to bringing numbers down, that's going to bring us closer to building a relationship with other organizations that are doing work and have been doing the work for a long time. And it's going to bring us closer to the people who are in the midst of this maelstrom, so that we can walk alongside them. I mean, I don't have to tell you how many times in Scripture we're called to care for. The litany of people we're called to care for. Or how we're supposed to respond to our siblings, to our neighbors, to our enemies, to everyone, with love, with compassion, with generosity, with kindness. That is why week 2 is necessary. What is our response? I've talked to many people about this event. Many people who said, "Well, yeah, I've read a lot about it." Okay, I'm glad that you're informed about it. It's not really for me. Okay, well, you are not. You do not have a substance use disorder. Maybe one of your loved ones does not have a substance use disorder, but maybe one of your loved ones is friends with somebody with a substance use disorder. Maybe your neighbor has a substance use disorder. Maybe your former babysitter has experienced a loss because of a substance use disorder. It affects our lives because it affects our community. And until our community is whole and well, we can't stop doing the work that has been placed in our hands as the people of God, as the body of Christ, as the church. So these are not necessarily marching orders, because you've already been given them if you've cracked a Bible, if you've read the gospel, right? But this is something that we need to be aware of, and we need to continue learning about and continue gathering information about, not just so that we're well informed, but so we're well informed and we know where to go, where to move, and how to act, and that we can draw other people into that movement with us. I'm not going to see. I've been doing youth ministry for almost 20 years, and I've had, I'm almost off this hand as far as youth that I've lost to addiction, and I don't want to move into this hand. The likelihood is that I will, but I don't want to. And so if I can do anything, and if I can ask you to help me do anything to prevent that, you better believe I'm going to. Yeah. So again, thank you, Randy. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, those of you who have tuned in online or who are watching this at a later time. Don't stop with this. Don't stop with this opioid, this 2-week thing. Find more information. Check out resources. Scour the internet. Get more information and figure out what you can do and where you can go, because this has to stop, and it's going to stop by us caring enough and loving enough to do something about it. So thank you. Let me go ahead and close us in prayer. God, we give you thanks for your presence with us tonight. We give you thanks for making space for us to have hard conversations, for giving us permission to have hard conversations about faith and about our neighbors and about ourselves and about this world that has moved, it seems, so far from what you intended it to be. But thank you also for reminding us of the goodness that is innate in each one of us, the goodness that compels us to go out and step into valleys and step into mess and step into situations that are scary, and to reflect your love, so that we might usher people out of their valleys and out of their darkness, but also so that we might shine a light into those spaces, so that the dark spaces don't exist anymore. So just equip us and enable us and empower us to go do the work that you've placed in our hands. Give us courage, give us hope, and just help us to be restorers of joy to those who have drifted into seasons of their lives where it seems so elusive. Give us what we need, God. Be bigger than this. We know you are, but be undeniably bigger than this, and continue to use us and make us available to your movement. We pray all these things, Lord, in your Son's name. Amen.